was standing in my cramped apartment kitchen, staring at an email that made my hands shake. The subject line read, "Invitation from the Office of the President." 3 days earlier, my brother Marcus had looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sarah, you need to stop pretending you're special. You're not going to change the world with your little computer projects." Well, Marcus, about that. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been the quiet one in the Johnson family. While my older brother Marcus commanded every room he entered with his booming voice and natural charisma, I was the girl who preferred the company of circuit boards and coding languages. Our parents, Robert and Patricia Johnson, owned a small hardware store in Columbus, Ohio, and they never quite knew what to make of their daughter who spoke fluent Python by age 14. Marcus was everything they understood. Star quarterback in high school, business major at Ohio State, now working his way up the corporate ladder at a major insurance company in Cleveland. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and had the kind of confident smile that made people listen when he spoke. At family gatherings, he'd regale everyone with stories about his latest business deals, his golf handicap, or his corner office, with the view of Lake Erie. Then there was me, Sarah Johnson, 26 years old, living in a converted studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery in downtown Columbus. My office was a folding table from Walmart that I'd positioned next to the single window, where I spent 18 hours a day hunched over my laptop, working on something I'd never tried to explain to my family. How could I tell them about the potential of blockchain technology for securing voting systems when they still called me for tech support every time their router needed resetting? The smell of fresh bread from downstairs had become my morning alarm clock. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, would sometimes leave a bag of day-old pastries by my door, probably worried I'd forget to eat. She wasn't wrong. When you're trying to solve problems that could revolutionize democracy itself, meals become an afterthought. My apartment was a reflection of my priorities. The furniture was mismatched and minimal, a futon that doubled as my couch and bed, a small desk I'd rescued from a garage sale, and walls covered with whiteboards where I'd sketch out algorithms and system architectures. The centerpiece was my workstation, 3 monitors displaying lines of code, blockchain diagrams, and endless research papers on cryptographic security. This wasn't just my home, it was my laboratory. I'd been working on something called Secure Vote for the past 2 years. It was a blockchain-based voting system that could, theoretically, eliminate election fraud while maintaining voter privacy. The technology was complex, involving zero-knowledge proofs, distributed ledgers, and cryptographic hashing that would make each vote simultaneously anonymous and verifiable. I knew it could work. I'd run thousands of simulations, tested it against every attack vector I could imagine, and refined the code until it was elegant in its simplicity. But knowing something works and convincing the world to listen are 2 entirely different challenges. I'd submitted my research to academic conferences, only to receive polite rejection letters. I'd pitched it to voting machine companies, who thanked me for my time and never called back. I'd even tried reaching out to government officials, sending carefully crafted emails that disappeared into the void of bureaucratic inboxes. The rejections didn't sting as much as the silence. Every Sunday, I'd make the 40-minute drive to my parents' house in Westerville for our traditional family dinner. Dad would fire up the grill, Mom would fuss over her famous potato salad, and Marcus would hold court at the dining room table, updating everyone on his latest achievements. Last promotion, latest bonus, newest client acquisition. His success was measured in numbers that everyone could understand. "Sarah's still playing with her computers," Mom would say when people asked about me, her voice carrying that particular tone parents use when they love you but don't quite understand what you're doing with your life. She wasn't being mean. She genuinely didn't know how else to explain my work. Marcus never missed an opportunity to reinforce this narrative. "Sarah's got her head in the clouds," he'd say with a condescending chuckle, "always working on these theoretical projects that never go anywhere. You need to be more practical, sis. The real world doesn't care about your coding experiments." I'd learned to stay quiet during these conversations, focusing on my plate while Marcus explained how real success worked. According to him, I needed to get a real job at a real company, where I could use my computer skills to solve actual problems. The air quotes were implied but unmistakable. What he didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I wasn't just writing code. I was trying to solve one of democracy's most fundamental problems. Every election cycle brought new concerns about security, integrity, and trust. Paper ballots could be lost or tampered with. Electronic voting machines could be hacked. Mail-in voting faced logistics challenges and verification issues. But blockchain technology offered a solution that was both secure and transparent. My system would create an immutable record of each vote while maintaining complete voter privacy. Election officials could verify results in real time, and citizens could confirm their individual votes were counted correctly without revealing how they voted. It was elegant, secure, and revolutionary, but revolutionary ideas don't matter if no one will listen. I'd spent countless nights debugging code, researching cryptographic protocols, and refining user interfaces. My browser history was filled with academic papers on election security, government procurement processes, and constitutional law. I'd taught myself legal frameworks, studied international voting systems, and analyzed security vulnerabilities in existing technologies. The work was isolating. While Marcus networked at corporate events and built relationships that advanced his career, I was alone in my apartment, solving problems that most people didn't even know existed. I didn't have colleagues to bounce ideas off, no team to celebrate small victories with, no mentor to guide me through the complex world of government technology adoption. My social life had become non-existent. College friends had moved on to traditional careers, relationships and life milestones that felt foreign to my experience. Weekend invitations became less frequent, as people learned that I'd probably decline to stay home and work. Dating was nearly impossible when your idea of an interesting conversation involved consensus algorithms and cryptographic hashing. The loneliness was amplified by my family's lack of understanding. Every family gathering reinforced the narrative that I was the dreamer, the impractical one, the sister who needed to get serious about her future. Marcus's success was tangible and immediate. Salary increases, promotions, recognition from peers. My progress was measured in lines of code, security tests passed, and theoretical problems solved. But I believed in what I was building. Late at night, when debugging sessions stretched into the early morning hours, I'd remind myself why this mattered. Democracy depended on citizens' trust in the electoral process. If that trust eroded, everything else crumbled. I wasn't just building software. I was trying to preserve the foundation of our republic. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd been working on a particularly complex cryptographic proof when I realized I could simplify the entire verification process. Instead of requiring voters to understand blockchain technology, I could create an interface so intuitive that casting a secure vote would be easier than ordering coffee online. I spent the next 3 days implementing the new approach, surviving on energy drinks and Mrs. Chen's pastries. The code was beautiful, clean, efficient, and unbreakable. I had created something that could change everything. That weekend, I drove to family dinner with unusual excitement. For once, I had something concrete to share, something that even Marcus might understand. I'd prepared a simple explanation of what I'd accomplished, focusing on the practical benefits rather than the technical details. But as soon as I started talking about Secure Vote, I saw the familiar glazed look in their eyes. Dad nodded politely while checking his phone. Mom smiled the way she did when she was trying to be supportive but didn't understand a word I was saying. And Marcus just shook his head. "Sarah, you're not special," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of brotherly condescension. "You think you're going to solve problems that actual experts have been working on for decades? You're living in a fantasy." The words hit harder than they should have. I'd heard variations of this speech before, but something about the timing, coming right after my breakthrough, made it feel especially cruel. "I'm not trying to be special," I said quietly. "I'm trying to solve an important problem." "With what credentials?" Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "You don't have a PhD. You don't work for the government. You don't have any real-world experience in election security. You're just some girl in an apartment who thinks she can revolutionize democracy from her bedroom." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, hoping someone would defend me, but found only uncomfortable expressions and suddenly fascinating dinner plates. I left early that night, driving home through the dark streets of Columbus with Marcus's words echoing in my head. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just deluding myself, pretending that my work mattered when real experts with real credentials were handling real problems. But the next morning, I woke up to an email that would change everything. The sender was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Deputy Director of Cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security. The subject line read, Secure Vote Blockchain Voting System. Urgent request for information. My hands trembled as I opened the message. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The email from Dr. Elena Rodriguez was brief but electrifying. "Ms. Johnson, your secure vote proposal has come to our attention through academic channels. We need to discuss implementation possibilities for upcoming pilot programs. Are you available for a secure video conference tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? This is time sensitive. Please confirm receipt." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. The Department of Homeland Security knew about my work. Somehow my research had reached people who actually mattered. People with the power to implement real change. I spent the next hour pacing my tiny apartment, trying to process what was happening. How had they found me? I'd never submitted anything directly to DHS. My academic conference rejections hadn't mentioned forwarding my work anywhere. Yet here was a deputy director of cybersecurity asking for a meeting about implementation, not just theoretical discussion. The professional part of my brain kicked in. I had less than 24 hours to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of my life. I pulled up my presentation files, refined my technical explanations, and practiced articulating complex concepts in accessible language. This wasn't a time for jargon or academic posturing. I needed to prove that Secure Vote wasn't just theoretically sound, but practically implementable. That evening, I called my best friend from college, Jessica Martinez, who worked as a cybersecurity consultant in Washington, D.C. If anyone could help me understand the government technology landscape, it was Jess. "Sarah, are you serious right now?" Jessica's voice crackled through my phone speaker as I chopped vegetables for dinner, trying to keep my hands busy. DHS doesn't just randomly reach out to independent developers. Someone important must have recommended your work. "But who?" I asked, dropping carrots into a pot of boiling water. "I've been working in isolation for 2 years. I don't have government connections or academic sponsors." "Think about it," Jessica said. "Who has access to your research? Where did you publish? Who might have seen your code repositories?" I paused, considering. I presented at a few small conferences, published some papers in open access journals, kept my GitHub repositories public, but none of that felt like it reached the right people. The right people are always watching, Sarah, especially when it comes to election security. After all the issues we've had with voting systems, the government is actively looking for solutions. If your work is as good as you say it is, I interrupted, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding in your apartment and start believing in yourself. The next day, I woke up 3 hours before my alarm. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through technical explanations and potential questions. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews 2 years ago and barely worn since. At exactly 2 p.m., I opened the secure video conference link Dr. Rodriguez had provided. The screen loaded to reveal a professional conference room with American flags flanking a large monitor. Dr. Rodriguez appeared first, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for making time on short notice," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made my apartment feel even smaller. "I'm joined by several colleagues from various departments who are interested in your work." The screen split to show additional participants: Dr. Michael Chen from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Amanda Foster from the Election Assistance Commission, and Robert Hayes from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. My heart rate spiked. These weren't just government employees. These were the people who made decisions about national technology policy. Before we begin, Dr. Rodriguez continued, I want to explain how your work came to our attention. Dr. Patricia Williams, from MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, forwarded your blockchain voting research to our attention 6 months ago. She described it as, quote, the most innovative approach to election security she'd encountered in years. Dr. Williams. I remembered her now. She'd been a keynote speaker at a small conference where I'd presented my preliminary research. I'd been so nervous about my presentation that I'd barely registered her presence in the audience. But apparently, she'd been paying attention. Your secure vote system addresses several critical vulnerabilities in current voting infrastructure, Dr. Chen added, pulling up what looked like my technical documentation on his screen. The zero-knowledge proof implementation is particularly elegant. How did you solve the scalability issues inherent in blockchain verification? For the next hour, I found myself in the most intellectually stimulating conversation I'd had in years. These weren't people who needed me to dumb down my explanations or justify why the work mattered. They understood the technical challenges, the security implications, and the potential for real-world impact. The beauty of your approach, Amanda Foster noted, is that it addresses both technical security and public trust simultaneously. Citizens can verify their votes were counted while maintaining ballot secrecy. That's been the holy grail of election security for decades. As the conversation progressed, I realized something profound was happening. These experts weren't just interested in my work. They were excited about it. They asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, scalability testing, and pilot program possibilities. This wasn't theoretical anymore. They were talking about actual deployment. Ms. Johnson, Robert Hayes said near the end of our call, what would you need to prepare a working prototype for a small-scale pilot program? I almost laughed. After 2 years of working alone, scraping together resources, and being dismissed by my own family, the White House was asking what I needed to make my dream a reality. I'd need a small team, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Maybe 3 or 4 additional developers, access to secure testing environments, and partnership with election officials willing to pilot the system. That can be arranged, Dr. Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract with full security clearance. You'd be working directly with our cybersecurity team to develop and test Secure Vote for potential national implementation. The words hit me like a physical force. National implementation. My little project, dismissed by my brother as fantasy, was being considered for nationwide deployment. There's one more thing, Robert Hayes added. The President's Science Advisory Committee is hosting a technology summit next month. We'd like you to present Secure Vote to the committee. The presentation would be attended by senior administration officials, congressional representatives, and technology leaders. I managed to maintain my composure during the rest of the call, discussing logistics, timelines, and next steps. But as soon as the video conference ended, I collapsed onto my futon, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. How did it go? I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain that my life had just completely changed. Instead, I called her, Jess, they want to implement it, nationally, and they want me to present to the President's Science Advisory Committee. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Jessica's voice came through, barely above a whisper. Sarah, do you understand what this means? You're about to become one of the most important technologists in America. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the same whiteboards, the same mismatched furniture, the same view of downtown Columbus. But everything felt different. The rejection letters I'd kept in a folder now seemed like ancient history. The isolation I'd felt for 2 years was replaced by the knowledge that some of the smartest people in government were eagerly waiting to work with me. I thought about Marcus's words from the weekend, "You're not special. You're just some girl in an apartment who thinks she can revolutionize democracy from her bedroom." Well, Marcus, it turns out that's exactly what happened. I opened my laptop and began drafting my resignation letter to the freelance clients I'd been working with to pay rent. In 3 weeks, I'd be moving to Washington, D.C. to begin the most important work of my life. But first, I had a family dinner to attend. And this time, I had something very different to share. Polis. Sunday dinner at the Johnson house felt different this time. I pulled into the familiar driveway in Westerville, but instead of my usual anxiety about facing another round of subtle dismissals, I felt something I'd never experienced before: quiet confidence. Marcus's BMW was already there, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. I could hear his voice through the open windows as I approached the front door, regaling our parents with some story about his latest business triumph. The sound that used to make me feel inadequate now seemed almost small. "Sarah's here," Mom called out as I entered through the kitchen door, carrying a store-bought pie instead of my usual homemade contribution. I'd been too busy preparing for my move to D.C. to bake. "Store-bought?" Dad asked, raising an eyebrow as he took the pie from my hands. "That's not like you, sweetheart." "I've been busy with work," I said simply, accepting Mom's hug while Marcus emerged from the living room with his usual commanding presence. "Still playing with your computer projects?" he asked, that familiar condescending smile playing at his lips. "Or have you finally gotten a real job?" I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. He was wearing an expensive suit, even for family dinner, his hair perfectly styled, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being told his dreams were impossible. For the first time, I saw him clearly, a successful man in a narrow field, impressive within his limited sphere, but utterly clueless about worlds beyond his experience. "Actually, I have some news to share," I said, settling into my usual chair at the dining room table. "Let me guess," Marcus continued, pouring himself a glass of wine without offering me any. "Another conference rejected your paper? Or maybe you're finally ready to apply for a position at a real tech company? I could put in a word at some places. Entry level, of course, but everyone has to start somewhere." The casual cruelty in his tone was breathtaking. Here was my older brother, the person who should have been my biggest supporter, systematically diminishing my worth with the precision of someone who'd had years of practice. "Marcus," Mom said gently, "let Sarah tell us her news." But Marcus wasn't finished. "I'm just saying, she needs to be realistic about her prospects. The tech industry is competitive, and Sarah doesn't have the corporate experience or network to compete with people who've been building real careers. She's been isolated in that apartment for 2 years, working on theoretical projects that the Department of Homeland Security wants to implement nationally," I interrupted quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Mom's hands froze in the middle of arranging napkins. Dad looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. "I'm sorry, what?" Marcus said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "The Department of Homeland Security," I repeated, enjoying the way each word seemed to land like a physical blow. "They've offered me a consulting contract to develop my voting security system for potential nationwide deployment. I'm moving to Washington, D.C. next month to work directly with their cybersecurity team." Marcus laughed, a short, harsh sound. "That's not possible. The government doesn't just hire random people off the street for national security projects. You're either lying, or someone is playing a prank on you." I pulled out my phone and showed him the official contract documents I'd received that morning. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Deputy Director of Cybersecurity at DHS. Dr. Michael Chen from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Amanda Foster from the Election Assistance Commission. Robert Hayes from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. "Would you like me to show you their business cards?" The color drained from Marcus's face as he stared at my phone screen. This can't be real. You don't have the qualifications for this kind of work. You don't even have a PhD. Apparently, solving problems matters more than collecting credentials," I said, my voice remaining calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "They're not interested in my degree, they're interested in my work." Dad leaned forward, studying the documents with the careful attention he usually reserved for important hardware store paperwork. "Sarah, are you saying the federal government is hiring you to work on election security?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And in 3 weeks, I'll be presenting my secure vote system to the President's Science Advisory Committee. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus set down his wine glass with shaking hands, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to panic. The president's? You're going to meet the president? Mom whispered, her hand pressed to her chest. The advisory committee includes senior administration officials and congressional representatives. It's possible the president will attend, yes. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You're telling me that my sister, who lives above a bakery and hasn't had a real job in 2 years, is suddenly some kind of national security expert. I'm telling you that the work you've been dismissing as, quote, computer games is about to become part of America's election infrastructure, I replied, my patience finally wearing thin. The work you called fantasy? The government is prepared to spend millions implementing it. But how? Marcus demanded, beginning to pace around the dining room. How did they even know you existed? You don't have connections, you don't have a reputation, you don't have... I have results, I interrupted. I solved a problem that experts have been working on for decades. I created something that works, something that matters, something that can actually protect democracy. And unlike your quarterly reports and sales figures, my work doesn't disappear at the end of the fiscal year. The attack was deliberate and precise. I'd spent years listening to Marcus define success in terms of corporate hierarchies and paychecks. Now I was showing him that real impact couldn't be measured by his narrow metrics. You think you're better than me, Marcus said, his voice rising. You think because some government bureaucrats are interested in your project, that makes you more important than people who've actually built careers in the real world. I think you've spent so much time telling me I wasn't special that you forgot to notice when I became exactly that, I said, standing to face him. While you were networking and climbing corporate ladders, I was solving problems that actually matter. While you were measuring success by your salary, I was creating technology that could protect millions of voters. This is temporary, Marcus insisted, his composure completely shattered. Government contracts end. Projects get canceled. You'll be back to your little apartment in 6 months, and then what? You'll have no career, no network, no backup plan. You're right, I said, surprising him. Government contracts do end. But revolutionizing democracy tends to open doors. MIT has already offered me a research position. Stanford wants me to lead their new election security initiative. And 3 major tech companies have reached out about consulting opportunities. Each revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His carefully constructed worldview, where success was defined by traditional corporate achievement and his sister was the family failure, was crumbling in real time. You never told us about any of this, Dad said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and confusion. Why didn't you share what you were working on? I looked at my father, this good man who'd never understood my work but had never actively discouraged it either. Because every time I tried, Marcus explained why it didn't matter. Every family dinner became a lecture about getting serious, getting realistic, getting a real job. After a while, it was easier to stay quiet. Mom was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked between her children. Oh, Sarah, we had no idea. We thought you were just wasting her life, I finished gently. I know. And maybe from the outside, it looked that way. But breakthrough innovation rarely looks impressive while it's happening. It's usually just someone alone in a room, working on problems that other people have given up on. Marcus slumped back into his chair, his face pale and defeated. For the first time in my life, my older brother, the golden child, the success story, the one who always had all the answers, looked lost. I don't understand, he said quietly. How did this happen? How did you? When did you become important? I suggested. I've always been important, Marcus. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it. The silence that followed was heavy, with years of misunderstanding, missed opportunities, and words that couldn't be taken back. I had achieved everything I'd dreamed of. Recognition, validation, the chance to make a real difference in the world. But looking at my family's shocked faces, I realized that victory sometimes feels more complicated than you expect it to. The week following that explosive family dinner passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and preparations that felt surreal. Moving from my cramped apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery to a government-sponsored workspace in Washington, D.C., required more than just packing boxes. It meant stepping into a completely different version of my life. But the hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the silence from my family. After I'd left that Sunday, walking out while Marcus sat stunned and my parents struggled to process what they'd learned, no one had called. No congratulations, no apologies, no attempts to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Just radio silence that spoke volumes about how thoroughly I'd shattered their understanding of who I was supposed to be. Jessica drove down from D.C. to help me pack, her excitement providing a stark contrast to my family's absence. "Sarah, do you realize what you've done?" she said, carefully wrapping my monitors in bubble wrap. "You've just accomplished something that most people only dream about. You solved a national problem from your bedroom, and now the government is rolling out the red carpet." "It doesn't feel real yet," I admitted, boxing up years of research notes and prototype hardware. "Part of me keeps waiting for someone to call and say it was all a mistake." "That's imposter syndrome talking," Jessica said firmly. "You earned this. Every late night, every rejection, every time Marcus made you feel small, this is validation that your work matters." The mention of Marcus stung. Despite everything, despite years of dismissal and condescension, he was still my brother. The little girl in me who had once looked up to him couldn't quite shake the hope that he might call, might apologize, might finally see me as worthy of respect. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Dr. Rodriguez. Your security clearance has been expedited. Please plan to arrive in D.C. by Thursday for orientation. Looking forward to working with you. Dr. Rodriguez." The Deputy Director of Cybersecurity for the Department of Homeland Security was texting me personally about my arrival. The absurdity of it hit me again. 6 months ago, I'd been debugging code alone at 2 a.m., wondering if anyone would ever take my work seriously. "You need to see this," Jessica said, holding up her phone. She'd been monitoring news sites and government technology blogs for any mention of my project. TechCrunch just published an article. "Mystery developer's blockchain voting system catches government attention." They don't name you, but they're calling it potentially revolutionary. I read over her shoulder, my heart racing as I saw my work described in terms I'd only dreamed of. Industry sources suggest the system could address fundamental vulnerabilities in current voting infrastructure while maintaining the privacy and accessibility voters expect. The article went on to speculate about implementation timelines and potential nationwide deployment. "They're taking this seriously," I whispered. "Of course they are. Your system works. It's elegant, secure, and solves real problems. The only person who seems surprised by this success is you." That evening, as Jessica and I shared Chinese takeout in my nearly empty apartment, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hi, Mom?" "Sarah, honey." Her voice sounded strained, like she'd been crying. "How are you? Are you really moving to Washington?" "Thursday," I confirmed. "I start orientation with the cybersecurity team on Friday. We've been talking, your father and I, and we realize we owe you an apology. We had no idea what you were accomplishing. We let Marcus's perspective influence how we saw your work." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of relief and lingering hurt. "I tried to tell you what I was working on, Mom." Every time I brought it up, the conversation changed to why I needed a more traditional career. "I know, sweetheart, we were wrong. Your father spent the week researching blockchain technology and election security. He's been reading articles about your field until midnight every night, trying to understand what you've been doing." The image of my practical, hardware store-owning father staying up late reading cryptography papers was both touching and heartbreaking. All these years they could have shown interest, could have tried to understand, could have supported me instead of dismissing me. "What about Marcus?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. Mom's pause stretched uncomfortably long. "Marcus is struggling with this. He's having a hard time processing that his little sister has achieved something he doesn't understand. He's always defined success in terms he could measure: salary, title, recognition from peers. Your accomplishment doesn't fit his framework. That's not my problem to solve, Mom. No, it's not, she agreed quietly. But he's still your brother. He's hurt and confused and probably scared that everything he's worked for seems small in comparison to what you've done. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Mom sharing Dad's pride and her own regret about not being more supportive. But throughout it all, Marcus remained conspicuously absent. No message, no call, no acknowledgement that his entire worldview had been proven wrong. Thursday morning, Jessica drove me to the airport. My entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag containing my most important research materials. Everything else, the mismatched furniture, the whiteboards covered in algorithms, the rejection letters I'd kept as motivation, stayed behind. You know what the best part is? Jessica said as we waited for my boarding announcement. You're about to work with some of the smartest people in the country. No more isolation, no more wondering if anyone cares about your work. You're joining a team that gets it. She was right. For 2 years, I'd been a team of 1, responsible for every aspect of Secure Vote's development. Now I'd have colleagues, collaborators, people who understood both the technical challenges and the importance of the mission. The flight to DC was smooth, but I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change below me. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, it hit me that I was literally leaving my old life behind. The apartment, the isolation, the family dynamics that had defined me for so long. All of it was becoming part of my past. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the TechCrunch article. Congratulations, I guess. I stared at the message for a long time. I guess, even now, even after everything had been proven, he couldn't offer genuine support. The text felt like a perfect encapsulation of our relationship. Grudging acknowledgement wrapped in residual dismissal. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "Thank you." Sometimes the smallest words carry the most weight. In those 2 words, I wasn't thanking him for his half-hearted congratulations. I was thanking him for years of dismissal that had taught me to rely on myself, for condescension that had motivated me to prove him wrong, for never believing in me in a way that made my eventual success feel entirely my own. Landing at Reagan National Airport felt symbolic. I was arriving in the nation's capital not as a tourist or job seeker, but as someone the government had specifically recruited to solve critical problems. The contrast with my departure from Columbus, where I'd been seen as the family disappointment, was almost overwhelming. Dr. Rodriguez had arranged for a driver to meet me at the airport. The man holding a sign with my name wore a government ID badge and treated me with the kind of professional respect I'd rarely experienced. As we drove through DC traffic toward my temporary housing, I watched the monuments and government buildings pass by, knowing that in less than 24 hours, I'd be walking into one of them as an official consultant. That night, alone in a furnished apartment that was both nicer and more sterile than anywhere I'd ever lived, I called my parents to let them know I'd arrived safely. Dad answered, his voice bright with an enthusiasm I'd never heard when discussing my work. "Sarah, how's Washington? Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," I admitted, but mostly excited. I've been working toward this for so long that it feels like everything is finally clicking into place. "Your mother and I are so proud of you. We've been telling everyone about your success. Mrs. Patterson from next door asked if you might speak to her grandson about computer science careers." The idea of being held up as an example for other young people felt strange and wonderful. Growing up, I'd never had role models who looked like me or worked in my field. Maybe I could be that person for someone else. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Every rejection letter, every dismissive comment from Marcus, every lonely night debugging code had led to this moment. Tomorrow I would walk into the Department of Homeland Security as a recognized expert in my field. But tonight, I was just Sarah Johnson from Columbus, Ohio, who had believed in herself when no one else would. Walking into the Department of Homeland Security headquarters for the first time felt like entering a different universe. The massive complex in Southwest DC buzzed with an energy I'd never experienced, hundreds of brilliant minds working on problems that affected millions of Americans. Security checkpoints, badge scanners, and corridors lined with classified briefing rooms reminded me that I was no longer working alone in my apartment above a bakery. Dr. Rodriguez met me in the lobby at exactly 8 a.m., her crisp, professional demeanor softened by what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Welcome to DHS, Sarah. Ready to change how America votes?" The orientation began in a secure conference room where I met my new team. Dr. James Harrison, a cryptography expert who'd left MIT to work on national security applications. Maria Santos, a user experience designer who specialized in making complex systems accessible to everyday citizens. Dr. Kevin Park, a cybersecurity analyst who'd spent 5 years identifying vulnerabilities in current voting systems. These weren't just colleagues. They were some of the most talented people in their respective fields, and they were excited to work on my project. "Sarah, we've been studying your secure vote architecture for weeks," Dr. Harrison said, pulling up technical diagrams on a wall-mounted display. "The mathematical elegance of your zero-knowledge proof implementation is remarkable. How did you solve the computational overhead problems that have stumped other blockchain voting initiatives?" For the first time in 2 years, I was having technical conversations with people who immediately grasped not just what I'd built, but why it mattered. No more simplified explanations, no more defensive justifications. Just pure intellectual collaboration with peers who shared my passion for solving complex problems. The key insight was realizing that we didn't need to verify every transaction in real time, I explained, moving to the whiteboard. By implementing a delayed verification system with cryptographic commitments, we can maintain security while dramatically reducing computational requirements. Maria leaned forward, studying my diagrams. "This is brilliant, but how do we explain this to voters who think blockchain is just cryptocurrency hype? The user interface needs to be so intuitive that my grandmother could cast a secure vote without understanding any of the underlying technology." "Exactly," I said, feeling that familiar rush of excitement when all the pieces of a complex puzzle start fitting together. The most sophisticated security system in the world is useless if people can't or won't use it. The next 3 hours flew by as we dove deep into implementation challenges, security protocols, and user experience design. These people didn't just understand my work. They were expanding it, improving it, making it better than I ever could have achieved alone. During lunch in the DHS cafeteria, Dr. Park shared the broader context of our project. "Sarah, you need to understand how significant this is. After the 2020 election challenges and ongoing concerns about election integrity, there's enormous pressure from Congress and the White House to develop voting systems that are both secure and transparent. Your technology could restore public trust in democracy itself." The weight of that responsibility hit me differently than it had when I was working in isolation. This wasn't just about proving my technical abilities anymore. It was about protecting the foundation of American democracy. That afternoon, I received my first classified briefing on current voting system vulnerabilities. The information was sobering. Foreign interference attempts, domestic hacking concerns, infrastructure weaknesses that kept election officials awake at night. My secure vote system wasn't just innovative, it was urgently needed. "We have a timeline," Dr. Rodriguez explained as the briefing concluded. "The President's Science Advisory Committee presentation is in 2 weeks. If they approve moving forward, we'll implement a pilot program in 3 test counties during next year's midterm elections. Success there could lead to nationwide deployment by the 2028 presidential election. My technology could be protecting American democracy in less than 4 years." The girl who'd been dismissed as not special might soon have her work safeguarding the votes of millions of citizens. That evening, I called Jessica to debrief about my first day. "Jess, I don't think I fully understood what I'd accomplished until today. These people, actual experts, people with decades of experience, they're treating my work like it's revolutionary." "Because it is revolutionary," Jessica replied. "You just needed the right people to recognize it. How does it feel to finally be appreciated for what you bring to the table?" The question caught me off guard. How did it feel? Validating, obviously. Exciting, certainly. But also overwhelming in ways I hadn't expected. Success at this level came with pressure I'd never experienced, and responsibilities that extended far beyond my personal satisfaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How was your first day? Dad and I are so proud of you." I smiled, typing back, "Amazing. I'm working with an incredible team on something that could change everything." Her response came immediately. "We never doubted you'd do something special." The message made me laugh out loud. They had doubted me, constantly, consistently for years. But I understood what she meant. They were rewriting history to align with this new reality, where their daughter was a national security consultant. It was their way of processing a success they'd never seen coming. No message from Marcus, though. According to Mom's updates, he'd been unusually quiet since our explosive dinner conversation. Part of me wondered if he was struggling with something deeper than just professional jealousy. Maybe a fundamental questioning of how he'd define success and worth for himself and others. The next morning brought a surprise that changed everything again. Dr. Rodriguez called me into her office with news that made my head spin. "Sarah, we've received an unusual request. The President's Chief Technology Officer wants to meet with you privately before the committee presentation. Apparently, the President himself has expressed interest in understanding your technology on a deeper level." I sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "The President wants to meet with me?" "Next Tuesday, Oval Office. 1 hour to explain how secure vote works and why it matters for American democracy. Consider it a preview of your committee presentation, but with an audience of one very important person. The Oval Office." I was going to explain my work to the President of the United States in the most powerful room in the world. The contrast with Marcus's dismissive comments about my little computer projects was so stark it felt surreal. "Dr. Rodriguez, what if I mess this up? What if I can't explain it clearly enough, or if the President has concerns I can't address?" She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp eyes that had made her a successful cybersecurity leader. "Sarah, you spent 2 years developing this technology alone, overcoming every obstacle, solving problems that stumped teams of experts. You didn't get here by accident. Trust yourself." That weekend, I prepared for the most important presentation of my life. Not just the technical aspects. I could explain blockchain cryptography in my sleep, but the broader implications, how secure vote could restore faith in American elections, how it balanced security with accessibility, how it protected both individual privacy and collective transparency. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, timing my explanations, refining my language, preparing for every possible question. This wasn't just about my career anymore. This was about convincing the leader of the free world that a girl from Columbus, Ohio, had created technology that could strengthen democracy itself. Sunday evening, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. For the first time since our confrontation, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Sarah, I saw a news article about voting technology and the current administration's initiatives. Are you really about to meet with the President?" "Tuesday," I confirmed, unsure why he was calling. "I don't understand how this happened," he said quietly. "I don't understand how I got everything so wrong about what you were doing." The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the Marcus who'd spent years diminishing my work and explaining why I needed to be more realistic about my prospects. "You saw what you expected to see," I said simply. "I was just a girl working on computers, not someone solving national security problems. The difference is context, not capability." "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. I was wrong about your work, wrong about your potential, wrong about what success looks like. I'm sorry." The words I'd waited years to hear finally came, but they felt different than I'd expected. Less satisfying, more sad. Success had given me perspective that anger never could have provided. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." After we hung up, I realized that my relationship with Marcus would never be the same. Not because of resentment or anger, but because I'd outgrown the need for his approval. His dismissal had once defined my sense of worth. Now it was just background noise in a much larger story about what I could accomplish when I believed in myself. Tuesday morning, I woke up knowing that in a few hours, I'd be explaining my life's work to the most powerful person in the world. The girl who'd been told she wasn't special was about to walk into the Oval Office as a recognized expert on protecting American democracy. Marcus had been wrong about a lot of things, but he'd been right about one. I wasn't special. I was extraordinary. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, DC autumn air that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of my hotel room mirror, adjusting my navy blazer for the 10th time, knowing that in 2 hours I'd be walking into the most famous office in the world to explain my life's work to the President of the United States. The Secret Service background check had been thorough but surreal. Agents investigating my college roommates, former employers, even Mrs. Chen from the bakery below my old apartment. All to confirm that Patricia Johnson from Columbus, Ohio, was trustworthy enough to enter the Oval Office with classified voting security technology. Dr. Rodriguez met me at the White House visitors' entrance, her usual professional demeanor carrying an extra layer of gravity. "Sarah, remember that the president's time is incredibly limited. You'll have about 45 minutes to cover the technical overview, security implications, and implementation timeline. Focus on the big picture, why this matters for American democracy." Walking through the West Wing felt like moving through history itself. Portraits of past presidents lined the hallways, reminding me that countless world-changing decisions had been made within these walls. Staffers moved with purposeful urgency, carrying briefing folders and speaking in hushed tones about matters of national importance. "Ms. Johnson?" A young aide approached us outside the Oval Office. "The president is ready for you." The door opened, and there I was, standing in the most powerful room in the world. The Resolute desk, built from the timber of a British Arctic exploration ship. The presidential seal woven into the carpet beneath my feet. Windows overlooking the Rose Garden, where presidents had walked and contemplated decisions that shaped history. And behind the famous desk sat the President of the United States, looking up from a briefing folder with genuine curiosity in their eyes. "Ms. Johnson, please sit down," the president said, gesturing to one of the chairs positioned in front of the desk. "I've been reading about your secure vote technology, and I have to admit, the technical details are above my pay grade. But the implications for election security, that I understand. Walk me through how this works." For a moment I felt that familiar flutter of nerves that had plagued me during family dinners, when I tried to explain my work. But this was different. The president wasn't dismissing me before I started. They weren't questioning my credentials or suggesting I pursue more traditional career paths. They were genuinely interested in understanding what I'd created. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure display system. "Mr./Madam President, imagine if every American could vote with the same confidence they have when making a bank transaction online, but with absolute privacy and verifiable accuracy." For the next 30 minutes, I walked through Secure Vote's architecture, using analogies and visual demonstrations that made complex cryptographic concepts accessible. The president asked thoughtful questions about scalability, cost, and international implications. They weren't trying to catch me in technical mistakes. They were genuinely exploring how this technology could strengthen American democracy. "The beauty of your system," the president said, studying my demonstration, "is that it addresses both sides of the trust equation. Voters know their ballots are secure and counted accurately, and election officials can prove the integrity of results in real time. That's exactly what we need to restore confidence in our democratic process." Dr. Rodriguez had briefed me that the president would likely focus on political implications, but their questions revealed a deeper understanding of technology than I'd expected. They grasped how blockchain immutability could prevent tampering, how zero-knowledge proofs protected voter privacy, and how distributed verification eliminated single points of failure. "Ms. Johnson, I have to ask, how does an independent developer from Ohio create technology that our best government cybersecurity experts have been struggling with for years?" The question went to the heart of something I'd been thinking about since joining the DHS team. Sometimes breakthrough solutions come from outside established systems, Mr./Madam President. I didn't have preconceptions about what was impossible, so I focused on what was necessary. Democracy requires both security and trust. I built a system that delivers both. The president leaned back in their chair, considering my words. Tell me about the pilot program timeline. We're proposing 3 test counties for the 2026 midterm elections, I explained, pulling up implementation charts. Rural, suburban, and urban environments to test scalability across different demographics and infrastructure. If successful, we could have nationwide deployment ready for the 2028 presidential election. 2028, the president repeated thoughtfully. That would be my successor's election, regardless of the outcome in 2024. Are you confident this technology can handle the security requirements of a presidential contest? More confident than I am in any current system, I said without hesitation. Secure Vote isn't just more secure than existing options. It's designed to be mathematically impossible to compromise without detection. The president's chief technology officer, who'd been quietly observing from a chair near the windows, spoke up. Sarah, can you explain how this addresses the challenge of public trust? Even the most secure system is useless if citizens don't believe in it. This was the question I'd been hoping for. The intersection of technology and human psychology that had driven my entire design philosophy. Traditional voting systems ask citizens to trust institutions and processes they can't see or verify. Secure Vote lets every voter independently confirm their ballot was counted correctly while maintaining complete privacy. Trust becomes verifiable, rather than assumed. The president nodded slowly. That's the key, isn't it? Not just security, but provable security that ordinary citizens can understand and verify for themselves. Exactly. Democracy only works when people believe their voices matter. If citizens can't trust that their votes are counted accurately, the entire system breaks down. Secure Vote doesn't just protect against fraud, it proves that protection exists. As our meeting entered its final minutes, the president asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Ms. Johnson, what do you think your work says about American innovation? I paused, considering the deeper implications of their question. I think it proves that breakthrough ideas can come from anywhere, Mr./Madam President. I wasn't working at a major university or tech company. I didn't have prestigious grants or corporate backing. I just had a problem I believed needed solving, and the persistence to keep working until I found a solution. That's very American, the president said with a slight smile. The idea that someone working alone in an apartment can create technology that strengthens democracy itself. It reminds me why we invest in individual innovation and why we can't let bureaucracy stifle creative problem solving. The president stood, signaling our meeting was concluding. Ms. Johnson, I want you to know that you have my full support for this initiative. The challenges facing American democracy are real, and solutions like yours give me hope that we can meet them. Dr. Rodriguez, please ensure Ms. Johnson has everything she needs to make this pilot program successful. As I packed up my laptop, the president added something that made my heart race. Sarah, I'd like you to present Secure Vote to the full cabinet next month. If we're going to revolutionize how Americans vote, our entire national security team needs to understand what you've created. Walking out of the Oval Office felt like floating. The President of the United States had just endorsed my work and requested that I brief the cabinet. The girl whose brother had said she'd never amount to anything special had just received approval from the highest office in the land. Dr. Rodriguez waited until we were outside the West Wing before speaking. Sarah, that was extraordinary. I've seen dozens of technology presentations to the president, and I've never witnessed that level of engagement and enthusiasm. You've just secured the kind of presidential backing that can fast-track revolutionary changes in government technology. That afternoon, I called my parents to share the news. Dad answered on the first ring, his voice eager with anticipation. Sarah, how did it go? Did you really meet the president? Not only did I meet the president, Dad, they want me to present to the entire cabinet next month. Secure Vote has full presidential support for the pilot program. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Dad's voice came through, thick with emotion. Sweetheart, I don't have words. Your mother and I are so incredibly proud of you. In the background, I could hear Mom crying, happy tears this time. The kind that come when you realize your child has achieved something beyond your wildest dreams. That evening, Jessica took me to dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Potomac River. "Sarah, do you realize what just happened? You went from being dismissed by your own family to having the President of the United States personally endorsing your work. That's not just success. That's vindication on a historic scale." She was right, but the feeling was more complex than simple vindication. Yes, I'd proven Marcus wrong about my potential. Yes, I'd shown my parents that my computer projects had real-world importance. But the victory felt bigger than personal satisfaction. I was helping protect the foundation of American democracy. The work that had started as a technical challenge in my cramped apartment had become a national priority with presidential backing. The girl who'd been told she wasn't special was now briefing the most powerful person in the world on technology that could safeguard millions of votes. Marcus had been wrong about my potential, but he'd been right about one thing. I wasn't special in the way he'd defined it. I was something much more important. I was necessary. And tomorrow, I'd start working to implement technology that could preserve democracy itself. The weeks following my Oval Office meeting transformed my life in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Word of the president's endorsement spread through Washington's tech and policy circles like wildfire, creating opportunities and challenges I'd never imagined facing. My temporary apartment became a revolving door of secure phone calls with congressional staffers, encrypted video conferences with international election security experts, and classified briefings with intelligence officials who wanted to understand how secure vote could protect against foreign interference. The isolation I'd experienced for 2 years was replaced by a schedule so packed that Dr. Rodriguez assigned me a government liaison just to manage meeting requests. "Sarah, you need to see this," Maria Santos said, bursting into our secure workspace with her tablet displaying the morning's tech news. "Wired magazine is calling you the democracy defender. TechCrunch has you on their list of women revolutionizing government technology. And MIT Technology Review wants to feature Secure Vote as their cover story next month." The media attention was surreal. Journalists who specialized in cybersecurity and election technology were describing my work in terms I'd only dreamed of hearing. But more importantly, the coverage was reaching people who mattered: state election officials, voting rights advocates, and international democracy organizations. Dr. James Harrison looked up from his cryptographic analysis workstation. "Sarah, we've received formal inquiries from election officials in 12 states who want to volunteer for the pilot program. That's 4 times more than we expected. Your presidential presentation didn't just secure funding, it created genuine grassroots demand for implementation." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd struggled to get anyone to take my work seriously. Now I had more opportunities than I could handle, all because the right person in the right room had understood what I'd created. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number. "Ms. Johnson, this is Dr. Andreas Muller from the German Federal Office for Information Security. We've been following your secure vote development. Would you be available for a consultation regarding European Union election security initiatives?" International interest. My technology was attracting attention from democratic governments worldwide who faced similar challenges with election security and public trust. What had started as a solution to American voting problems was becoming a global conversation about protecting democracy in the digital age. That afternoon brought the kind of call that still felt surreal despite everything I'd experienced. My phone displayed White House on the caller ID. "Sarah, this is Jennifer Walsh, the President's Chief of Staff. The President would like you to accompany them to the G7 summit next month. Several world leaders have expressed interest in discussing election security technology, and the President wants you there to explain Secure Vote's potential for international implementation." The G7 summit. I would be advising the President of the United States in discussions with other world leaders about protecting global democracy. The scale of what was happening still took my breath away. That evening, I finally had time to call my parents and share the latest developments. Mom answered with the excitement that had become her new normal whenever we talked. "Sarah, we saw you mentioned in the Washington Post. Mrs. Patterson showed us the article at the grocery store. She said her grandson is now studying computer science because of your success story." The idea that my work was inspiring other young people to pursue STEM careers felt incredibly meaningful. I remembered how isolated I'd felt as a teenager interested in coding, how few role models I'd had who looked like me or shared my background. "How's Marcus doing?" I asked, still uncertain about where we stood after his apology. Mom's voice became more careful. He's been different since your dinner conversation. Quieter, more thoughtful. He's been asking a lot of questions about your work, reading articles about blockchain technology. I think he's really trying to understand what you've accomplished. And how's he handling that? Honestly, I think he's proud of you, but also struggling with some things about himself. Watching his little sister achieve something he never imagined possible has made him question some of his assumptions about success and importance. That was more insight into Marcus's psychology than I'd ever heard from Mom. It suggested he was going through a deeper reckoning than just professional jealousy, maybe a fundamental reevaluation of how he'd defined worth and achievement. The next morning brought news that changed everything again. Dr. Rodriguez called an emergency team meeting, her expression more serious than I'd seen since my first day. Team, we've received intelligence that concerns Secure Vote directly. Foreign actors have been attempting to infiltrate American election infrastructure for years, and our sources indicate they're specifically trying to understand and potentially compromise blockchain voting initiatives. My blood ran cold. Are they targeting our work specifically? Not yet, but they will be once the pilot program begins. Sarah, this means your technology isn't just academically interesting anymore. It's strategically important enough that hostile foreign governments want to stop it. Dr. Kevin Park pulled up classified threat assessment charts on our main display. The positive news is that Secure Vote's architecture makes it virtually impossible to compromise without detection. The concerning news is that adversaries might try to prevent implementation through other means, targeting key personnel, spreading disinformation about the technology, or pressuring political officials to abandon the program. The weight of responsibility hit me differently now. My work wasn't just about improving American elections. It was about protecting democracy against sophisticated international threats. The stakes had escalated beyond anything I'd considered when I was debugging code alone in my apartment. What does this mean for the pilot program? I asked. Enhanced security protocols for everyone involved, Dr. Rodriguez replied. Background checks for all personnel, secured facilities for development work, and counterintelligence monitoring of anyone trying to access information about Secure Vote. That afternoon, I received my first real taste of what being a high-profile government consultant meant. 2 Secret Service agents appeared at my apartment to discuss personal security measures. They weren't there because of immediate threats, but because my work had made me valuable enough to protect. Ms. Johnson, we're recommending some basic precautions, Agent Patricia Collins explained. Varied daily routines, awareness of surveillance, secure communication protocols. Nothing dramatic, but your profile has increased significantly. The surreal nature of my new reality hit me as I signed paperwork for a government security detail. 6 months ago, I'd been worried about paying rent. Now federal agents were concerned about protecting me from foreign intelligence services. That weekend, Jessica drove down from her consulting work in Baltimore to help me process everything that was happening. We sat in my apartment, ordering Chinese takeout while I tried to articulate the emotional whiplash of rapid success. Sarah, you're handling this better than most people would, she said, watching me sort through interview requests from major news outlets. But are you taking care of yourself? This level of attention and responsibility would overwhelm anyone. She was right. The constant meetings, media requests, and security briefings were exhilarating but exhausting. I'd gone from social isolation to being one of the most in-demand experts in government technology. The adjustment was more challenging than I'd expected. I keep waiting for someone to realize they made a mistake, I admitted. Like maybe the president got confused about what my technology actually does, or the media coverage is based on a misunderstanding of the technical capabilities. That's imposter syndrome talking, Jessica said firmly. You didn't get here by accident. Your work is revolutionary, and the recognition is long overdue. But you need to remember that you're still the same person who solved these problems when no one was watching. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw your interview in the tech section of the Times. I'm starting to understand what you've been working on. It's incredible, Sarah. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. The message was longer and more thoughtful than any communication I'd received from him in years. It suggested he was genuinely grappling with what my success meant, not just for me, but for his own understanding of what mattered in the world. He's trying, I said, showing Jessica the text. People can change, she replied. Maybe seeing his sister advise the President of the United States was the wake-up call he needed about his own assumptions and priorities. That night, I stood at my apartment window looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C., thinking about the journey that had brought me here. Every rejection letter, every dismissive family conversation, every lonely night of coding had led to this moment where my work was being discussed in the Oval Office, and foreign governments were taking notice. But the most profound change wasn't external recognition. It was internal confidence. I no longer needed anyone else's validation to know that my work mattered. The girl who had once desperately wanted her brother's approval now understood that the only opinion that truly counted was her own. Tomorrow, I would brief the cabinet on secure vote implementation. Next month, I'd accompany the president to discuss election security with world leaders. The technology I'd created in isolation was becoming a cornerstone of democratic protection on a global scale. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but especially about this. I wasn't just special. I was changing the world. 1 year later, I stood in the same Columbus bakery where I'd once lived above in that cramped apartment. But everything had changed. Mrs. Chen beamed at me from behind the counter, a framed newspaper clipping on the wall showing the headline, "Local Tech Genius Revolutionizes American Voting." The apartment upstairs had been converted into a small museum of sorts. Mrs. Chen proudly showed visitors where the democracy lady had developed her groundbreaking technology. I was back in Ohio for a very different kind of family gathering. The pilot program had exceeded every expectation. 3 test counties had successfully implemented secure vote for their midterm elections with 0 security incidents, 99.7% voter satisfaction ratings, and real-time verification that eliminated any questions about result accuracy. Congress had unanimously approved nationwide deployment for the 2028 presidential election, and 12 countries had signed agreements to implement their own versions of the system. But today wasn't about professional achievements. Today was about something more personal. Marcus was getting married, and he'd asked me to be his best person, a role traditionally reserved for the groom's closest friend or sibling. When he'd called 6 months ago with the request, his voice had carried a humility I'd never heard before. "Sarah, I know I haven't been the brother you deserved for most of our lives. I spent so many years being threatened by your intelligence and potential that I missed watching you become someone extraordinary. I'd be honored if you'd stand up for me the way you should have been able to count on me standing up for you." The wedding was small, held in my parents' backyard in Westerville. The same space where Marcus had once dismissed my computer projects was now decorated with white roses and filled with friends and family who understood that something important had shifted in our family dynamics. As I adjusted Marcus's tie before the ceremony, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said quietly. "All those years I thought I was the successful one, the one with the impressive career and important achievements. But watching you change the world made me realize I'd been measuring success with the wrong ruler entirely." "Marcus, your work matters too," I said, meaning it. "Insurance helps people protect what they've built. That's important." "It is," he agreed, "but it's not world-changing. And I spent so much time being intimidated by your potential that I tried to convince you it didn't matter. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I wasn't the brother who believed in you when belief was what you needed most." The conversation was interrupted by Dad calling us outside, but the moment felt significant. Marcus wasn't just apologizing again. He was acknowledging that his entire framework for understanding success and worth had been flawed. During the ceremony, I watched my brother marry Emma, a kindergarten teacher who clearly adored him and brought out a gentleness I'd rarely seen in him growing up. As they exchanged vows, Marcus spoke about learning to value different kinds of strength and recognizing that the people closest to us often have gifts we're too blind to see. The reception was held in the same backyard, under string lights that turned the familiar space into something magical. During dinner, Dad stood to give a toast that surprised everyone. "I want to talk about my daughter Sarah," he began, raising his glass toward where I sat at the head table. "A year ago, I thought I understood what my children had accomplished. Marcus had his business success, which I could measure and understand. Sarah had her computer work, which I couldn't. I'm ashamed to admit that I let my own limitations define how I saw her achievements." He paused, his voice becoming emotional. "Then the White House called, And I realized that while I'd been worried about Sarah finding a traditional path to success, she'd been creating an entirely new path that none of us had imagined possible. She didn't just find success, she redefined what success could look like. The applause that followed felt different from the polite family gathering clapping I was used to. This was genuine recognition, tinged with regret for years of misunderstanding, but celebration of what had ultimately been achieved. Later in the evening, as the reception wound down, Mom found me sitting alone on the back porch, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through Columbus's light pollution. "You're thinking about something deep," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Just processing how different everything is now," I replied. "This time last year, I felt like the family disappointment." Tonight, Marcus asked me to stand up for him at his wedding. Dad gave a speech about redefining success, and you're all proud of work you still don't completely understand. Mom was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something I've never said before?" I nodded. "Even when we didn't understand what you were doing, even when we worried about your unconventional path, we always knew you were special. We were just too scared to encourage something we couldn't guide or protect. We wanted security for you, and we thought that meant traditional success. But you were wrong about what security looks like," I said gently. "Completely wrong. Real security comes from being so good at something important that the world needs what you offer. You created your own security by solving problems that mattered. We just couldn't see it because it didn't look like anything we'd experienced before." The conversation continued for another hour, covering years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities for connection. But instead of dwelling on regret, we talked about moving forward with a better understanding of each other. As the evening ended and I prepared to drive back to my hotel, Marcus pulled me aside one more time. "Sarah, I have something to give you," he said, handing me a small, wrapped box. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something that acknowledged what you've accomplished." Inside was a simple silver bracelet, engraved with a single word, revolutionary. "I had it made after reading about the G7 summit where you advised world leaders on democratic technology," he explained. "I realized my little sister wasn't just successful. She was actually changing history. I wanted you to have something that recognized that achievement, from someone who should have seen it sooner." The gift meant more than any government commendation or media coverage I'd received. This was personal recognition from the person whose approval I'd once desperately wanted, offered freely now that I no longer needed it. Driving back to my hotel through the quiet streets of Columbus, I thought about the journey that had brought me full circle. The girl who'd once coded alone in an apartment above this very bakery was now returning as someone who'd fundamentally changed how democracy would function in the digital age. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez. "Sarah, hope you're enjoying family time. Quick update. Australia and Canada have both approved secure vote implementation for their next federal elections. Your technology is going to protect democratic processes on 3 continents within 5 years. 3 continents. Millions of voters across multiple democracies would cast ballots using technology I'd created when everyone thought I was wasting my time." The scale still felt surreal. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't global. It was personal. I'd started this journey desperately seeking validation from people who couldn't see my worth. I was ending it confident in my own value, surrounded by family members who had learned to recognize and celebrate achievements they didn't fully understand. The next morning, before flying back to Washington, I stopped by the bakery one more time. Mrs. Chen insisted on packing me a box of pastries for the important work in the capital, treating me with the same kindness she'd shown when I was just a struggling developer who couldn't always afford breakfast. "You know what I'm most proud of?" she said as I prepared to leave. "You never forgot where you came from. Big important job in Washington. But you still come back to visit your old neighbor." Standing outside the bakery, looking up at the window of my former apartment, I realized something profound about success and belonging. I hadn't just proven Marcus wrong about my potential. I'd proven that extraordinary achievements could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. The apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery would always be where I'd learned to believe in myself when no one else would. The cramped space with mismatched furniture and whiteboards covered in algorithms had been my launching pad to changing the world. As my taxi headed toward the airport, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The same face that had once stared back at me from bathroom mirrors, while I practiced presentations no one would hear. But the person behind that face had been transformed by the journey from dismissal to recognition, from isolation to global impact. Marcus had said I wasn't special, and in a way, he'd been right. What I'd accomplished wasn't about being special. It was about being persistent, curious, and unwilling to accept that important problems couldn't be solved. The White House had called, not because I was chosen or destined for greatness, but because I'd chosen greatness for myself when no one else could see it coming. And that, I realized, was the most revolutionary thing of all. 5 years after that life-changing phone call from Dr. Rodriguez, I stood at the podium of the largest technology conference in the world, Tech Global 2029 in San Francisco. 20,000 attendees from every corner of the globe had gathered to hear about the future of technology, and I was the opening keynote speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same girl who'd once been too nervous to present at small academic conferences was now addressing the most influential technology leaders on the planet. But this wasn't just another speaking engagement. Today marked the official global launch of Secure Vote International, a nonprofit organization I'd founded to help emerging democracies implement secure voting technology. What had started as a solution to American election security had evolved into a worldwide movement to protect democratic processes everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at an audience that included CEOs of major tech companies, government officials from dozens of countries, and young developers who reminded me of my former isolated self. 5 years ago, I was working alone in a cramped apartment, convinced that I could solve problems that experts said were impossible. Today, secure vote technology protects the votes of over 400 million people across 23 countries. The numbers were staggering even to me. The 2028 U.S. presidential election had been the most secure and trusted in American history, with real-time verification eliminating any questions about result accuracy. International adoption had accelerated beyond our wildest projections, with countries from Estonia to South Korea to Brazil implementing their own versions of the system. But I'm not here to talk about technology specs or implementation statistics, I continued. I'm here to talk about what happens when we stop accepting that important problems can't be solved, and what's possible when we refuse to let other people's limited vision define our potential. In the front row, I spotted familiar faces. Dr. Rodriguez, now Director of Cybersecurity at DHS, beaming with pride. Maria Santos, who'd left government service to become my Chief Technology Officer at Secure Vote International. Dr. James Harrison, who'd taken a sabbatical from his university position to help train election officials worldwide on blockchain security protocols. But the face that meant the most was in the third row. Marcus, who'd flown out from Cleveland specifically to hear my keynote. He'd transformed as much as I had over these 5 years, leaving his corporate insurance job to start a nonprofit focused on financial literacy education. Our relationship had evolved from sibling rivalry to genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values about making meaningful contributions to the world. The question I get asked most often, I continued, is how someone without traditional credentials managed to revolutionize election security. The answer is simple. I didn't try to revolutionize anything. I just focused on solving one problem at a time, building one secure transaction at a time, testing one algorithm at a time. Revolutionary change often looks like boring persistence from the inside. After my keynote, the response was overwhelming. Venture capitalists wanted to discuss funding for my next projects. University presidents offered endowed professorships. Government officials from countries I'd never visited invited me to consult on their democratic institutions. But the conversation that mattered most came during the networking break. A young woman approached me nervously, clutching a worn laptop bag and looking exactly like I had at my first technology conference years ago. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a computer science student at UC Berkeley, and I've been working on machine learning algorithms for climate change prediction. Everyone keeps telling me it's too ambitious, that I should focus on more practical applications for job prospects." I saw myself so clearly in her uncertainty that familiar fear that maybe everyone else was right about what was possible and what wasn't. "Elena, let me ask you something," I said, guiding her to a quieter corner of the conference hall. "Do you believe your work could help address climate challenges?" "Yes, absolutely. I've developed models that can predict extreme weather events with 94% accuracy up to 6 months in advance. It could revolutionize disaster preparedness and resource allocation." "Then the question isn't whether it's too ambitious," I replied. "The question is whether you're willing to persist through the inevitable rejections and dismissals until you find the people who recognize what you've created." We talked for 30 minutes about her research, technical challenges, and the emotional difficulty of pursuing breakthrough work while facing constant skepticism. By the end of our conversation, Elena was standing straighter, her voice more confident as she described her algorithms. "Ms. Johnson, can I ask you something personal? How did you handle the loneliness? Working on something important but having no one who understood what you were doing?" The question hit me deeply because I remembered that isolation so vividly. The nights spent debugging code, while wondering if I was deluding myself about the importance of my work. "Elena, loneliness was the price of being ahead of the curve, but here's what I learned. The loneliness of pursuing something meaningful is much more tolerable than the regret of abandoning it. And eventually, if your work truly matters, you'll find your people, colleagues who get excited about the same problems, mentors who recognize your potential, a community that values what you're building." Before she left, I gave Elena my direct contact information and connected her with climate technology researchers in my network. 6 months later, she'd received a full scholarship to complete her PhD and had been invited to present her work at the UN Climate Technology Summit. That evening, at the conference after-party overlooking San Francisco Bay, I found myself in conversation with Dr. Patricia Williams from MIT, the professor whose initial recommendation had started my entire journey with the government. "Sarah, I have to confess something," she said, sipping her wine as the Golden Gate Bridge sparkled in the distance. "When I first saw your research presentation years ago, I knew immediately that you'd created something revolutionary. But I also knew that breakthrough innovations usually get ignored unless they come through traditional channels. So you made sure it reached the right people," I said, finally understanding how my work had actually gotten to Dr. Rodriguez. "I didn't just forward your research to DHS," she admitted. "I spent 3 months building a case for why the government needed to pay attention to your work. I briefed congressional staffers, lobbied department heads, and essentially created a bureaucratic pathway for your technology to be seriously considered." The revelation was both gratifying and humbling. My work had been good enough to change everything, but it had required an advocate with established credibility to open doors that wouldn't have opened for me alone. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you go to that effort for a complete stranger?" Dr. Williams smiled, looking out at the bay. "Because I was once a young woman with revolutionary ideas that people dismissed. A mentor helped me navigate the system, and I've been paying that forward ever since." Breakthrough innovation often requires both brilliant work and strategic advocacy. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I video called my parents to debrief about the conference. They'd become my most enthusiastic supporters, following my career with an attention to detail that made up for years of not understanding what I was working on. "How was the keynote, sweetheart?" Mom asked, her face filling the screen with obvious pride. 20,000 people, and standing ovations, and more opportunities than I know what to do with," I replied. "But honestly, the best part was meeting young developers who reminded me of myself 5 years ago." "Your father recorded the live stream," Mom said. "He's been showing the neighbors and anyone else who'll watch. He's so proud he can barely contain himself." Dad appeared on screen, beaming. "Sarah, we've been thinking about something. You've changed how the world votes, protected democracy in dozens of countries, and inspired a whole generation of young technologists. What's next?" It was a question I'd been contemplating as my nonprofit work expanded and new challenges emerged. Climate change, healthcare access, economic inequality. The world was full of complex problems that could benefit from innovative technological solutions. "I think I want to build something bigger," I said, "a foundation that identifies young innovators working on critical global challenges and provides them with the resources, mentorship, and advocacy they need to succeed." Instead of just hoping that breakthrough ideas will randomly find their way to the right people, we could systematically connect emerging talent with decision-makers. The idea had been percolating for months. I'd met dozens of brilliant young researchers and developers who were working on potentially world-changing technologies, but struggling to be taken seriously by institutions and investors. My experience had taught me that talent and innovation weren't rare, but recognition and opportunity were. "That sounds exactly like something you should do," Dad said. "Use your success to create pathways for other people to achieve theirs." The next morning brought a surprise that demonstrated how much my life had changed. My phone rang with a call from the Nobel Committee. They were awarding me the Peace Prize for revolutionary contributions to democratic integrity and international election security. The recognition felt surreal but appropriate. My work had indeed helped preserve peace by protecting the democratic processes that prevent conflicts. But even more meaningful was a text from Marcus that arrived while I was still processing the Nobel news. "Sarah, saw the announcement. I've never been more proud to be your brother. You didn't just prove me wrong about what was possible. You showed me what actually matters. Thank you for never giving up on your dreams, even when your family gave up on them first." 6 months later, I stood in a converted warehouse in Austin, Texas, watching the first cohort of fellows from the Johnson Foundation for Emerging Innovation present their work to potential funders and government partners. Elena Vasquez was there with her climate prediction algorithms, now backed by a $10 million research grant. A young man from Nigeria was demonstrating blockchain applications for transparent humanitarian aid distribution. A team from India had developed machine learning tools for early disease detection in underserved communities. These brilliant minds represented something I'd learned through my own journey, that world-changing innovation rarely emerges from traditional institutions. It comes from individuals willing to tackle problems that others consider impossible, working with persistence and creativity until they find solutions. As I watched each presentation, I thought about that Sunday dinner 5 years ago when Marcus had told me I wasn't special, that I needed to stop pretending I could change the world with my little computer projects. He'd been wrong about my potential, but right about one thing. I wasn't special in any mystical or predetermined way. What I had was curiosity, persistence, and a refusal to accept that important problems couldn't be solved. Those weren't special gifts. They were choices I made every day. Choices that led to breakthrough innovations, global recognition, and the opportunity to help others make similar journeys. Standing in that warehouse, surrounded by the next generation of world changers, I realized that my greatest accomplishment wasn't secure vote or the Nobel Prize, or even changing how democracy functions in the digital age. My greatest accomplishment was proving that extraordinary achievements are possible for ordinary people who refuse to let other people's limited vision define what they can become. The girl who'd been told she wasn't special had indeed changed the world. But more importantly, she'd learned that being special was never the point. Being persistent was everything. So moi. And now she was helping others discover that same truth for themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.